You are not clingy. Your nervous system learned that love disappears without warning, so it monitors constantly, seeks reassurance compulsively, cannot rest when connection feels uncertain. This is not a character flaw, this is a survival strategy. You are not cold. Your nervous system learned that closeness leads to engulfment, that emotional expression invites punishment, that safety requires distance. This is not emotional unavailability. This is protection. Attachment styles are not personalities. They are not who you are. They are how your nervous system learned to survive relationships when relationships were the source of both safety and threat. Secure attachment developed when caregivers were consistently responsive. The nervous system learned that connection is safe. Needs will be met. I can explore and return. This becomes the blueprint. But when caregivers were inconsistent, the nervous system adapted. Anxious attachment hyperactivates, constantly monitoring for signs of abandonment, because sometimes love was there and sometimes it vanished. The only way to survive was vigilance. When caregivers were emotionally unavailable, the nervous system learned to deactivate. Avoidant attachment suppresses needs, because expressing need led to rejection. The only way to survive was self-sufficiency. When caregivers were both the source of comfort and the source of threat, when the person who should protect also harms, the system fractures. This is disorganized attachment. The nervous system cannot resolve the paradox. Approach leads to danger. Retreat leads to abandonment. There is no safe strategy, only contradictory impulses that shift without warning. These are not choices, they are adaptations, formed long before language, wired into neural circuits, operating automatically in every relationship you enter, and understanding this changes everything. Today we investigate attachment styles through neurobiology. We explore how early caregiving experiences shape brain development, how different attachment patterns reflect distinct nervous system strategies, and why these patterns persist into adulthood despite changed circumstances. This exploration draws on attachment neuroscience, research into limbic system development, and clinical frameworks including Stephen Forge's polyvagal theory, though it should be noted that while polyvagal concepts are widely used clinically, several of the theory's core neuroanatomical claims have been disputed by neuroscientists. We will focus on well-established attachment neurobiology while acknowledging where clinical frameworks extend beyond current scientific consensus. Research into attachment and brain function suggests attachment experiences in infancy may shape neural circuit development, particularly in the limbic system and prefrontal cortex. The limbic system, responsible for emotional regulation, appears to be profoundly influenced by early attachment quality. Based on neuroimaging studies, secure attachment is associated with balanced limbic activation. The amygdala, responsible for threat detection, shows moderate responses. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for regulation, develops robust connectivity. The result, a nervous system that can detect threat without overreacting and regulate emotion without suppression. Anxious attachment shows different patterns in research. Neuroimaging studies indicate anxiously attached individuals show heightened amygdala activation in responses to social stimuli. The nervous system appears hypervigilant. Threat detection is amplified, and regulation capacity may be overwhelmed by the intensity of emotional response. This manifests as chronic relationship anxiety, not because the person lacks confidence, but because their nervous system, based on these findings, interprets ambiguity as threat. Neutral phases register as disapproving. Delayed responses trigger abandonment fear. The system is constantly preparing for loss. Avoidant attachment shows the inverse pattern in studies. Research indicates what some interpret as decreased affective processing in avoidantly attached individuals, though findings vary across studies. The nervous system may downregulate emotional response, suppress attachment-related thoughts. Based on these patterns, the system appears to have learned that emotional expression is dangerous, so it deactivates. This appears as emotional distance, but it is not necessarily lack of feeling. Research suggests it may be suppression of feeling. The avoidant person experiences emotion, but the nervous system, based on these findings, has learned to inhibit its expression and sometimes even conscious awareness. Disorganized attachment shows the most complex patterns. Studies of disorganized attachment reveal contradictory neural activation. Both approach and avoidance systems activated simultaneously. The person wants closeness and fears it, seeks connection and retreats from it. The nervous system has no coherent strategy because the early environment provided no safe option. These are not personality types, they are nervous system configurations, and they explain why changing attachment patterns is difficult. Because you are not changing thoughts. You are attempting to rewire neural circuits formed during critical development periods. Anxious and avoidant attachment styles are opposites, and they attract, not because they are compatible, but because they are complementary. The anxious person's nervous system hyperactivates, constantly seeking proximity, monitoring for signs of withdrawal, unable to rest in uncertainty. The avoidant person's nervous system deactivates, creating distance, suppressing emotional needs, unable to tolerate demands for closeness. When they meet, something happens. The anxious person pursues, the avoidant person withdraws. The pursuit triggers the avoidant person's fear of engulfment. The withdrawal triggers the anxious person's fear of abandonment, and both nervous systems confirm their original predictions. C. Connection requires constant effort. Closeness leads to suffocation. But here is why the pairing feels magnetic. Each person is recreating the original dynamic. The anxious person had inconsistent caregiving, sometimes available, sometimes not, so they are attracted to people who provide inconsistency. The pattern is familiar. The nervous system recognizes it. The avoidant person had caregivers who were emotionally intrusive or unavailable, so they are attracted to people who either pursue, recreating intrusion, or withdraw, confirming unavailability is normal. Either way, the pattern is familiar. And familiar to the nervous system feels right, even when familiar is dysfunctional. This creates a cycle. The anxious person pursues, the avoidant person distances. The distance increases anxiety, the anxiety increases pursuit. That pursuit increases the need for distance, and both people feel trapped. The anxious person cannot stop seeking connection, the avoidant one cannot stop needing space. Research suggests this pairing is common, not because it works, but because each person's nervous system finds the other's strategies predictable. And predictability, even painful predictability, feels safer than unfamiliarity. Breaking this cycle requires both people recognizing that the dynamic is not about the relationship. It is about two nervous systems operating from incompatible survival strategies. The anxious person is not actually being abandoned. The avoidant person is not actually being suffocated, but their nervous systems cannot tell the difference between past threat and present reality. For people with insecure attachment, secure relationships often feel wrong. Not bad, wrong, like something is missing. When a partner is consistently available, emotionally attuned, reliable, the insecurely attached nervous system does not register this as safety. It registers it as unfamiliar, and unfamiliar triggers alert. This is why anxiously attached people sometimes report feeling less attracted to partners who are consistently available. The nervous system learned that love comes with uncertainty. When uncertainty disappears, the pattern does not match, and pattern mismatch feels like absence of connection. The anxious nervous system is calibrated to pursuit. When there is nothing to pursue, the system does not know what to do. The relationship feels flat, boring, like it lacks passion. But it does not lack passion, it lacks anxiety. And the anxious nervous system has learned to interpret anxiety as evidence of significance. Avoidantly attached people experience similar discomfort with security. When a partner consistently expresses needs, seeks emotional intimacy, requests vulnerability, the avoidant nervous system experiences this as threat, not because the requests are unreasonable, but because the system learned that meeting others' emotional needs leads to depletion and engulfment. So secure partners feel demanding, clingy, too much, even when they are simply expressing normal attachment needs. This creates a painful bind. The relationships that could provide healing feel uncomfortable. The relationships that recreate wounds feel compelling. Research into attachment patterns indicate people often describe secure partners as boring precisely because these partners do not activate the familiar survival strategies. There is no chaos to navigate, no inconsistency to monitor, no emotional unavailability to overcome, and without activation of the survival strategy, the nervous system interprets the relationship as insignificant. Breaking this pattern requires tolerating discomfort, staying in relationships that feel unfamiliar, allowing the nervous system to learn that calm can coexist with connection, that the absence of drama is not absence of depth. This is difficult because it requires overriding the nervous system's guidance, trusting that what feels wrong might be right. Communication advice assumes both people can access rational thought during conflict, but nervous system state determines cognitive capacity. An insecure attachment creates states where rational communication becomes impossible. When the anxiously attached nervous system detects threat, a tone of voice, a facial expression, a delayed response, it floods with stress hormones. Research indicates anxious attachment is associated with elevated cortisol and heightened amygdala response. The system is in threat mode. In threat mode, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought, perspective taking, impulse control, goes offline. The person cannot process reassurance, cannot evaluate evidence, cannot regulate emotional response. They are not choosing to be unreasonable. Their nervous system is in a state where reason is not accessible. The avoidant nervous system responds differently. When demands for emotional intimacy increase, the system shuts down. Based on polyvagal concepts, some clinicians describe this as dorsal vagal activation. Though it should be noted these specific neurophysiological mechanisms remain debated in neuroscience. What is clear from research is that avoidant individuals show decreased emotional processing during attachment-related stress. The person becomes numb, disconnected, unable to access or express emotion, not because they do not care, but because the nervous system has activated a protective shutdown. In this state, attempts at emotional communication fail. The person cannot access the vulnerability required, cannot generate the emotional response their partner needs, cannot explain what is happening because conscious awareness of internal state is reduced. Both people experience the other as unwilling to communicate, but willingness is not the issue. Nervous system state is. And here's why standard communication techniques fail. They assume both people are in a state where prefrontal cortex is online, where rational discussion is possible, where perspective taking can occur. But in insecure attachment, conflicts activate survival states, and in survival states, communication becomes impossible. not difficult, impossible. What is needed is not better communication skills. What is needed is regulation, bringing both nervous systems back to a state where communication capacity exists. This requires recognizing a state, noticing when you or your partner have shifted into threat response or shutdown, and pausing, not to avoid the issue, but to allow nervous systems to return to baseline. Only then can communication occur, because only then do both people have access to the neural structures required for it. Understanding attachment as nervous system strategy changes everything, because it removes moral judgment. You are not clingy because you are weak. Your nervous system learned hypervigilance as survival. In an environment where love was unpredictable, monitoring became necessary. The strategy worked. It kept you connected to caregivers when connection was uncertain. You are not cold because you are damaged. Your nervous system learned deactivation as protection. In an environment where emotional expression was punished or ignored, suppression became necessary. The strategy worked. It prevented further harm. You are not chaotic because you are broken. Your nervous system developed contradictory strategies because the environment was contradictory. No single strategy worked, so the system shifts between them. This was adaptation to impossible circumstances. These patterns are not your fault. They formed before you had choice, before you had awareness, before you understood what was happening. But they are your responsibility now, because the nervous system that developed these strategies will continue operating from them until new patterns are established. And establishing new patterns is possible. Attachment styles are not fixed. Research confirms neuroplasticity allows neural circuits to reorganize. Secure relationships can provide corrective experiences. Therapy can help process early wounds and develop regulation capacity. But change requires recognizing the pattern, understanding it is not personality, not character, not who you are. It is how your nervous system learned to survive, and what was necessary then may not serve you now. Self-compassion begins here, with recognition that your attachment pattern was the best your system could do with the resources available, that it protected you when you needed protection, that it makes sense given your history. And from that recognition, change becomes possible, not through self-criticism, not through forcing yourself to be different, but through providing your nervous system new information, evidence that connection can be safe, that needs can be met, that vulnerability does not always lead to harm. This takes time, because neural circuits formed over years do not reorganize quickly, but they do reorganize with consistent experience, with support, and with patience. You are not your attachment style. You are a person whose nervous system adapted to early circumstances, and that nervous system can adapt again. Attachment styles are not personalities. They are survival strategies, patterns your nervous system developed to navigate relationships when relationships were unpredictable, unsafe, or absent. Anxious attachment is not clinginess. It is a system that learned love requires hypervigilance. Avoidant attachment is not coldness. It is a system that learned closeness requires shutdown. Disorganized attachment is not chaos. It is a system that learned there is no safe strategy. And secure attachment is not superiority. It is a system that learned connection is safe, a privilege, not an achievement. What if the way you attach is not who you are, but how you survived? Not to excuse harmful patterns, but to remove shame, to recognize that adaptation is not failure, that your nervous system did what it needed to do, and now it can learn something different. Attachment patterns can change, neural circuits can reorganize, but only when you stop viewing the pattern as personality defect and start viewing it as protective strategy that outlived its necessity. Self-compassion is the foundation. Understanding that your attachment style makes sense, that it was rational given your history, that you are not broken, you are adapted. An adaptation can evolve. Over the next week, notice your attachment pattern. Do not judge it. To understand it. When does your nervous system activate? What triggers pursuit or withdrawal? What state are you in during conflict? The pattern is not you. It is what your system learned, and what was learned can be updated.